They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. I never truly understood what that meant until the day my own son, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, chose to end me. Not with words, not with distance, but with his hands. It happened on a narrow mountain path in Colorado, the kind of place where the air is crisp and the silence feels holy. The kind of place where you expect peace, not death. My husband and I had gone hiking with my son and his wife, trying once again to bridge the growing chasm between us. I kept thinking, maybe today will be different. Maybe today, he'll finally see the man I remarried isn't his enemy. But instead, with the crunch of gravel underfoot and the thin whistle of wind through the pines, my son and his wife exchanged a glance I will never forget. And then they shoved us. I remember the weightlessness, the way the world tilted as my husband and I fell down the rocky incline. The pain was blinding, but worse was the realization. My son, my only son, had just tried to erase me. Somehow, through the haze, I turned my head toward my second husband. His face was pale, streaked with blood, but his eyes were still sharp. "Don't move," I whispered, my voice raw with agony. "Pretend we're dead." We lay there, broken, waiting for the sound of footsteps to fade, waiting for the two people we thought were family to believe they had succeeded. And as the silence closed in, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. This was no accident. It was a choice, and choices have consequences. Before I dive deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. It takes me hours upon hours to write, edit, and bring these stories to you. If you're reading this, please consider subscribing. It's a small gesture for you, but it means the world to me. So let me take you back. Let me show you how love became betrayal, and how betrayal sparked something far more powerful than fear. When you raise a child alone, especially after tragedy, you learn quickly how to live with contradictions. You learn how to smile at Little League games even though your heart aches, because your husband should have been there to cheer too. You learn how to tell bedtime stories with a voice full of wonder, even while your own nights are haunted by grief. That was my life after I lost David, my first husband, my high school sweetheart, the love of my youth. One autumn evening in Nashville, he left for work and never came back. A sudden heart attack. 29 years old. Just like that, the world snatched him from me, leaving me with our 3-year-old son, Ethan, and a house filled with echoes. For nearly a decade, I lived only for Ethan. Every ounce of me went into making sure he never felt the full weight of the absence we both carried. I worked long hours at Vanderbilt University's administration office, juggling bills and late nights, making sure he had clean uniforms, hot meals, and the kind of birthday parties that masked our broken reality. He was my purpose, my anchor. And I told myself over and over, this boy is all I have left of David. Protect him at all costs. And for a long time, I thought I was succeeding. Ethan was bright, a little shy, with a quick wit that could make even the sternest teachers laugh. He loved Legos, loved pretending to be a firefighter, and he never went to sleep without saying, "Good night, Mom. Love you more." That simple phrase became our ritual, our shield against the world. But time, as it always does, moved forward. By the time Ethan was a teenager, the edges of our bond began to fray in ways I didn't want to admit. He became moody, withdrawn, quick to roll his eyes when I tried too hard to fill the silence at dinner. Part of me told myself this was normal. Every teenager pushes their parents away. But there were moments, sharp and fleeting, when I'd see something colder in his gaze, a resentment I couldn't place. Still, I carried on. I poured myself into being both mother and father. I went to parent-teacher meetings alone. I sat through college tours in silence when other families filled the air with chatter. And through it all, I kept telling myself, he'll understand one day. He'll see how hard I tried. Life had a way of surprising me, though, because just when I thought love had burned itself out for me, I met Richard. Richard wasn't like David. No one could ever be. Where David had been youthful energy and impulsive joy, Richard was calm waters and steady ground. He was a professor of history at the same university where I worked. I met him during a faculty luncheon I'd been roped into helping organize. He was older by a few years, his voice deep and measured, his smile slow but genuine. We started talking about books, about the Civil War monuments scattered across Tennessee, about how history has a cruel way of repeating itself when we refuse to listen. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir in me. Not the fiery rush of young love, but something gentler, healing even. Dating as a widow felt like betrayal at first. I kept waiting for David's memory to strike me down, for guilt to claw me apart. But Richard never asked me to replace what I'd lost. He simply stood by me, steady as a mountain, until I realized I wasn't betraying my past. I was learning how to breathe again. When Ethan met Richard for the first time, he was 19, home from his first year of college. I'll never forget the stiffness in his handshake, the way he sized Richard up like a rival instead of someone I cared about. "So you're dating my mom," Ethan had said flatly. No humor, no warmth, just a challenge in his eyes. Richard, to his credit, only smiled. "I care about your mom, yes, and I'd like the chance to know you too." Ethan shrugged and walked away. That was the beginning. The years that followed were a delicate dance. Ethan tolerated Richard, but that was all. Holidays were tense, dinners filled with clipped responses and the occasional barbed comment. When Ethan got married, to a young woman named Madison who seemed sweet at first, but soon revealed a sharp tongue, things grew worse. I noticed it in little ways at first. The whispered conversations that would stop when I entered the room. The way Madison would refer to Richard as the stand-in or the replacement when she thought I couldn't hear. The way Ethan's arms would cross, his jaw tightening whenever Richard offered advice or even a friendly word. At family gatherings, I tried to brush it off. This is just the adjustment period, I told myself. Families take time to blend. But those little cracks began to spread. There was the Christmas when Ethan and Madison gave us a framed family photo, but had deliberately cropped Richard out of it. "Oh, it was the only one that fit the frame," Madison said with a smirk, while Ethan chuckled beside her. There was the Easter brunch where Ethan mocked Richard's career, calling him Professor Boring in front of friends and relatives, while Madison laughed too loudly at the joke. And there were the silences, the long, punishing silences when I tried to confront him, only for Ethan to look through me as though I were no longer his mother, but some distant acquaintance who had disappointed him. Still, I held on. I told myself, families fight, but they forgive. He's my son. He'll come around. But I didn't know then just how wrong I was. I didn't know that those cracks weren't just signs of strain, they were fault lines. And one day they would split wide open, with enough force to send me and Richard tumbling down a mountain. Because here's the truth I had yet to face. My son's resentment wasn't a passing phase. It wasn't just the growing pains of adjusting to a new family dynamic. No, it was something darker. Something festering. Something that would one day push him to make a choice no child should ever make. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, just picture us. A family in name only, sitting around dinner tables where smiles were forced, where every sentence was a minefield, where I clung desperately to the hope that time would heal. If only I had realized sooner that some wounds don't heal. They rot. Have you ever ignored red flags in a relationship? Family, friendship, or otherwise, because you hoped things would just get better? If so, what did you do when they didn't? Share your thoughts in the comments. Grief is a wound that never really closes. It scabs over, sure. It dulls. But sometimes all it takes is the smallest scrape, and suddenly, it bleeds again like it was yesterday. For years, I thought the worst thing I would ever endure was losing my husband, David, when we were still so young. That loss shaped me, carved me into something harder, tougher, determined to survive for my son. But the universe has a cruel sense of irony, because the sharpest pain I would ever feel didn't come from burying a husband. It came from watching my son, the boy who once depended on me for everything, look at me as if I were nothing. The cracks between us had been widening for years, but the triggering moment came one humid summer afternoon in Franklin, Tennessee, not far from where I grew up. Richard and I had decided to host a family cookout at our house. Burgers sizzling on the grill, the smell of charcoal in the air, laughter of neighborhood kids playing tag nearby. I wanted it to be simple, warm, the kind of gathering that reminded us of what mattered. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be a chance for healing. Ethan and Madison arrived late, as usual. She swept in wearing oversized sunglasses and a smirk, carrying a tray of store-bought potato salad, like it was a gift from the heavens. Ethan followed behind, his phone in hand, barely glancing up to greet us. The tension started small, like hairline fractures you almost don't notice at first. Richard asked Ethan about his job at the bank. Ethan gave clipped answers. Madison chimed in with digs disguised as jokes. Well, you know, Ethan practically runs the place since his boss is too old to keep up. Kind of like someone else we know. She shot a glance at Richard, her meaning clear. I forced a laugh. Tried to redirect the conversation. Tried to pretend we were still a family. But it all came undone when it was time to eat. We sat around the patio table, plates piled high. Richard said grace, as he always did. When we lifted our heads, Ethan pushed his plate back with a scrape of metal on glass. I'm not hungry, he said flatly. I blinked. What do you mean? You haven't eaten all day. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes hard. I lost my appetite the moment I walked in here. Silence fell. The neighbor's kids stopped laughing in the yard. Madison smirked into her sweet tea. I swallowed. Ethan, what's going on? And then he said it. The words that sliced deeper than any knife. You're not my family anymore. Not since you married him. The world seemed to tilt. For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, my son, my baby, the child I had sacrificed everything for. His jaw was tight, his eyes full of hate. I gave up trying to make this work a long time ago, he continued, his voice sharp and cruel. You chose him over Dad's memory, over me, and now, you expect me to sit here and pretend? No, I'm done. Richard shifted beside me, his hand brushing mine under the table. He didn't speak, he didn't have to. The pain in his eyes mirrored mine. But Ethan wasn't finished. You think I don't remember how things used to be? When it was just you and me. When you actually cared. Then this guy shows up. He jabbed a finger toward Richard. And suddenly you're all about him. What about Dad? Huh? What about the man you supposedly loved? Or did you just replace him the first chance you got? The venom in his tone knocked the air from my lungs. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat burned. My chest ached, and still, I searched for something to say that would pull him back. Ethan, I whispered, that's not fair. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Fair? Life hasn't been fair since Dad died. And instead of being there for me, you were too busy playing house with him. Madison reached over, resting a manicured hand on his arm. Baby, don't waste your breath. Some people can't understand loyalty. Her eyes flicked to me, gleaming with triumph. Something in me broke then. Not just cracked, shattered. All those years of scraped knees I'd bandaged, homework I'd stayed up late to help with, bills I'd juggled so he'd never go without. All of it collapsed under the weight of his contempt. I stood. My chair scraped back loudly against the patio floor. My voice shook, but it was steady enough to cut through the heavy silence. You're right, Ethan, I said quietly. Life hasn't been fair. I lost your father. I lost my partner. And I did everything I could to hold us together after that. Everything. But if you can sit here and say I don't care about you, if you can throw away all we had because you can't stand that I found a little peace again, then maybe you're not the son I thought you were. For the first time, Ethan flinched. Just barely. His eyes narrowed, but the mask slipped for half a second. Madison leaned in, whispering something in his ear. Whatever it was, it hardened him again. Without another word, Ethan stood and walked toward the front yard. Madison followed, her heels clicking like a victory march. The sound of their car engine starting was the only answer I got. I sat back down, trembling, my body numb. Richard placed his hand over mine, warm and steady. You don't have to keep trying, he murmured. You've done more than enough. But all I could think was, my son just disowned me. And I let him walk away. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. The words replayed in my head like a cruel recording. You're not my family anymore. I knew then that something had shifted. I wasn't just dealing with a stubborn son and his manipulative wife. I was dealing with people who had crossed a line so sharp, so brutal, it could never be uncrossed. That was the night I stopped telling myself it would get better. That was the night I realized forgiveness wasn't always possible. And that was the night I began to wonder if Ethan could say those words to my face, what else was he capable of? I didn't have the full answer yet. But soon, very soon I would. Because the next time Ethan and Madison invited us to spend time with them, it wouldn't be over dinner. It would be on a mountain path in Colorado. And this time, words wouldn't be enough for them. They wanted silence. Permanent silence. And they nearly got it. The world went quiet the moment I hit the ground. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that follows impact. The ringing silence after a car crash, the split second where your body can't quite believe what's happened. My lungs refused to pull in air. My ears roared with the echo of my own heartbeat. And pain, white hot, searing, shot through my ribs like knives. I don't remember the fall itself, only flashes, jagged rocks scraping my arms, the taste of iron flooding my mouth, Richard's cry of pain somewhere beside me. One moment we were on our feet, the next we were broken things lying at the base of a Colorado hillside, hidden from the world above. I forced my eyes open. The sky loomed overhead, blue and endless, indifferent to the betrayal that had just unfolded beneath it. My body screamed at me to stay still, but instinct clawed its way through the haze. Find Richard. I turned my head, every movement fire in my bones. He was there, just a few feet away, sprawled on the dirt, blood streaking his temple. His chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. Relief surged through me, so hard it nearly made me cry. Above us, footsteps crunched against gravel. Shadows shifted near the ridge. My son's voice, casual, sharp as broken glass. That takes care of it. Madison's laugh followed, light and cruel. They should have known when to quit. My heart seized. No panic, no confusion, just raw, animal terror. They thought they had killed us. And if we moved now, if we made a sound, they would make sure of it. I dragged in the smallest breath I could manage and forced my voice through the agony. Don't move, I whispered to Richard, my lips barely shaping the words. Pretend we're dead. His eyes flickered open, meeting mine. For a heartbeat, I thought he would argue. That instinct would drive him to fight. But then something cold, calculating passed over his face. He gave the faintest nod and went still. We lay there, unmoving, as the voices above us drifted farther away. The crunch of footsteps receded, swallowed by the mountain wind. Minutes passed, 10, maybe 20. Every second stretched into an eternity. My body screamed for me to move, to check my injuries, to hold Richard's hand and reassure myself he was alive. But I didn't dare. Finally, the silence became complete. No voices, no footsteps, just the rustle of leaves and the whistle of wind through the trees. That's when Richard spoke. His voice was hoarse, quiet, but steady. They'll be back, he said. They'll come down to check. The words chilled me to the bone. He was right. If Ethan and Madison truly wanted us gone, they wouldn't leave it to chance. They would come to make sure the job was finished. But then Richard said something else, something that turned my fear into something darker, sharper. There's something you don't know, he rasped, blood trickling from his temple. Something I should have told you before. I froze. What? He coughed, wincing as pain shot through him. About Ethan. About Madison. About why they hate me so much. My heart pounded in my ears. My body ached, every nerve screaming. And yet his words cut through everything, because in that moment, broken and bleeding on the rocks, I realized this wasn't just about jealousy or resentment. There was more. Something Richard had kept from me. Something that made my son believe that killing us was the only answer. The air grew colder, the shadows longer as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Richard's eyes closed for a moment, then fluttered open again, heavy with pain but sharp with intent. They're not going to stop, he whispered. And if we want to survive this, you need to know the truth. I wanted to ask, to demand answers right then and there. But before I could, the sound of footsteps returned, closer this time, crunching down the path toward where we lay. Ethan's voice again, low and certain, let's make sure. I gripped Richard's hand in mine, squeezing with what little strength I had left. My son's shadow stretched long over the rocks, blotting out the fading light. And I knew in that suspended breath of silence that everything was about to change. When you've been pushed to the edge, literally, something inside you changes. Pain becomes background noise. Fear sharpens into clarity. And the part of you that once begged for understanding, begged for reconciliation, burns away until only steel remains. I lay there on the cold rocks of that Colorado hillside, my body broken, my blood seeping into the dirt, and I understood with blinding certainty. My son wanted me gone. My flesh and blood. The boy I had carried, raised, protected. He had decided I was an obstacle, a loose end, a problem to be solved. But he had miscalculated. He thought his betrayal would finish me. Instead, it woke something I didn't know I still had, the will to fight back. The sound of footsteps drew closer, snapping me back into the present. Ethan and Madison were coming down the path to make sure we were dead. I tightened my grip on Richard's hand, forcing myself to remain still, forcing my breath shallow. My ribs ached with every inhale, but I dared not move. Careful. Madison's voice floated down, mocking, sweet as venom. Don't slip. Ethan snorted. If they're not dead, they will be soon. The shadow of his frame loomed above us. I shut my eyes, forcing myself into stillness. Seconds stretched. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, yet I willed my chest to rise only the slightest fraction. A pebble skittered near my head. Ethan had kicked at the rocks, testing, waiting for movement. My throat clenched, but I stayed silent. Looks like it worked, he muttered after a long pause. Let's go. Relief washed over me so hard I almost sobbed. Their footsteps retreated, climbing back up the slope until finally, mercifully, the sound faded again. Only then did I let out a shaky breath. Richard's voice was hoarse, each word costing him pain. We don't have long. They'll check again. We need to move. I can't, I started, then bit the word back. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not anymore. He squeezed my hand weakly. Listen to me. Before we do anything, you need to know the truth. About why they hate me. About why Ethan is doing this. I turned my head toward him. His face was pale, streaked with blood, but his eyes locked on mine with a piercing intensity. Madison, he coughed, grimacing. She came to me a year ago. Alone. She said Ethan was struggling, that he'd made some bad investments. She asked if I could help bail him out. I told her no. I frowned through the haze of pain. Why wouldn't you tell me that? Because it wasn't just money, he whispered. It was fraud. Illegal. He'd been dipping into accounts at the bank. Madison was pushing him, encouraging it. She wanted the lifestyle, the money, the power. And Ethan, he listened to her. He got in deeper and deeper. The words crashed over me like cold water. They needed silence, Richard continued. They knew if I ever told you, you'd confront him. You'd make him stop. Madison saw me as a threat. And Ethan, his eyes closed briefly, as if the truth weighed too much. He chose her side. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My son wasn't just resentful. He wasn't just jealous. He was corrupted, pulled into Madison's world of greed and schemes until he had convinced himself I was the enemy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to weep. But more than anything, I wanted to survive. Because survival now meant more than living. It meant justice. It meant making sure Ethan and Madison paid for what they had done. Richard's hand trembled in mine. You have to decide. We can stay down here and bleed out, or we can crawl out of this hell and fight back. The decision crystallized in that moment, sharp as glass. I'm not dying here, I whispered. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was low, steady, lethal. Not by their hands. Pain radiated through me as I shifted, dragging my battered body toward a cluster of rocks for leverage. My ribs screamed, but I gritted my teeth. Richard struggled beside me, his breath ragged but determined. Inch by agonizing inch, we pulled ourselves into the cover of the trees. The forest closed around us, shadows deepening as the sun dipped lower. Every branch cracked like thunder under our weight, but still, we pressed on. Because giving up was no longer an option. We collapsed finally against a fallen log, hidden from the path above. My hands shook as I pressed torn fabric against Richard's bleeding temple. They won't stop, I said quietly. the truth solidifying in my chest. If they think we're alive, they'll come after us again. We can't just run. We have to end this. Richard's eyes met mine. In them, I saw the same fire, the same grim resolve. And in that shared glance, something unspoken passed between us. This was no longer about survival. It was about taking back control. About making Ethan and Madison face the weight of what they had done. We sat in silence for a while, the forest alive with the sounds of distant birds and rustling leaves. Pain throbbed in every inch of my body, but beneath it was something new. Not just anger, not just grief, purpose. For nearly a decade after David died, my purpose had been Ethan. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made was for him. And now, with that bond shattered, my purpose shifted. It was no longer about protecting him. It was about protecting myself, protecting Richard, protecting the truth. I thought about the years I had begged for scraps of affection, ignored the whispers, smoothed over the cracks in the name of family. I thought about the countless nights I stayed awake, hoping time would heal us, and I realized those days were over. If Ethan and Madison wanted war, then war was what they would get. Not a loud war, not a messy, reckless war. No, I would not stoop to their level. Mine would be quiet, strategic, unforgiving. They thought they had buried me on that hillside. They thought I would vanish into silence, but I was still here, and I was done forgiving. That night, as darkness fell over the Colorado mountains, I leaned against Richard, my hand clasped in his, and whispered the words that marked the beginning of everything that followed. They made a choice today, I said, my voice raw but certain. Now it's my turn. The air was cold, the stars sharp against the sky, and in that vast, endless night, my grief transformed into something else. Something harder. Resolve. I didn't know yet how I would bring them down, but I knew I would. And when I did, Ethan and Madison would finally understand betrayal has a price. The days after the fall were a blur of pain, blood, and silence. Richard and I never reported the accident to the authorities. How could we? If Ethan and Madison had learned we were alive, they would have finished what they started. And besides, going to the police wasn't enough. My son was clever, respectable on paper, a bank employee with no criminal record. Madison was charming when she wanted to be. All they'd need were a few crocodile tears and a rehearsed story, and suddenly we'd look like bitter parents inventing tales out of paranoia. No, justice would not come from the law. It would have to come from me. We stayed in Colorado long enough to get patched up by a quiet clinic 2 towns over, far from where Ethan and Madison might search. Broken ribs for me, stitches and a concussion for Richard. The doctor didn't ask questions. Cash payments have a way of quieting curiosity. When we returned to Tennessee, I walked into my home with fresh eyes. Every photo on the wall, every memory of Ethan's childhood felt poisoned. His smile in those pictures wasn't the smile of a son. It was the mask of someone who had grown into a stranger who had tried to erase me. I stood in the hallway for hours that first night, staring at his high school graduation photo. Cap tilted, grin wide. My heart had once swelled with pride looking at it. Now I saw nothing but betrayal staring back at me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I pulled the frame from the wall and tucked it into the attic, out of sight. That was the first step. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was his enemy, and enemies fight back. I began with silence. No calls, no texts, no holiday invitations. For the first time in Ethan's life, I gave him nothing. No attention, no love, no recognition. At first, it wasn't easy. Habits of motherhood run deep. But I forced myself to starve him of what he had always taken for granted. Predictably, it didn't take long before Madison texted me. Haven't heard from you. Are you avoiding us? I didn't reply. 2 days later, Ethan's worried. You could at least answer. Still silence. A week passed, then another. And then Ethan himself called. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. His voice cracked through the phone speaker as he said, "Mom, I don't know what you're doing, but just call me back, okay?" I didn't. It was small, almost petty, but I knew my son. For all his cruelty, for all his arrogance, He thrived on being at the center of my world. To be ignored was a wound he didn't know how to handle. But that was just the beginning. The second step was information. Richard, despite his injuries, returned quietly to the university. He kept to his lectures, maintained his calm exterior, but beneath that surface, he was digging. And what he uncovered confirmed everything he'd confessed on the hillside. Ethan's job at the bank wasn't nearly as stable as he pretended. He was under quiet investigation for irregularities in several client accounts. Nothing public yet, nothing proven. But whispers had started to circle among his colleagues. And where there were whispers, there were trails to follow. I started pulling strings of my own. I'd spent years in university administration. I knew how to navigate records, how to ask questions without raising alarms. Friends in the legal department, old acquaintances in finance. People talk when you know how to listen. Piece by piece, I built the picture. Ethan had been skimming, shifting small amounts between accounts, covering his tracks with temporary adjustments. Madison, meanwhile, had been funneling the money into flashy purchases. Designer clothes, trips to New Orleans, a down payment on a car she had no business affording. They were sloppy, greedy, overconfident. I gathered every scrap of it, printouts, emails, receipts. I didn't act on it yet. Not directly. No, I wanted them to feel the walls closing in first. So I began the third step, sabotage. It started with birthdays. For years, I had sent Ethan gifts, expensive suits when he got his promotion, cash envelopes when money was tight, dinners at his favorite restaurants. This year, I sent nothing. When Madison's birthday rolled around, I used to plan elaborate dinners, order cakes, make sure she felt included. This year, nothing. Not even a card. The silence was louder than any confrontation. Madison posted a photo on Facebook of a small gathering with friends, her smile tight, her eyes sharp with something unspoken. I knew her type. Attention was her currency. And I had just cut her off. Then came the fourth step, reputation. It was easy enough to slip whispers into the right circles. A quiet comment to a friend of mine at the Chamber of Commerce. I hear Ethan's bank is having some trouble with audits. A casual remark to a colleague at the university. Funny, Madison's spending habits don't match Ethan's salary, do they? I didn't spread outright lies. I didn't need to. The truth, hinted at in the right places, grows like wildfire. And soon enough, I could see it working. One evening, I drove past Ethan and Madison's house. The driveway was full of cars, family gathering, by the looks of it. But through the window, I caught a glimpse of Ethan pacing, his gestures sharp, his voice raised. Madison sat stiffly on the couch, arms crossed, glaring at him. Cracks were forming, not the kind I had once ignored, but the kind I was now carefully widening. And then came the move that mattered most, documentation. Richard and I began compiling everything. Copies of Ethan's financial missteps, Madison's purchases, records of their trips. We didn't take it to the police yet. Timing was everything. Instead, we tucked it away, building a file so airtight no lawyer could wriggle them out of it. But I couldn't resist one small preview. I printed a single document, a transaction Ethan had corrected at the bank, the kind that looked innocuous at first, but revealed his theft if you knew what to look for. I folded it neatly, sealed it in an unmarked envelope, and slipped it into his mailbox one humid Friday night. No note, no explanation, just evidence. The next day, Madison called me. Her voice was sharp, panicked, trying to mask itself as anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? I let her scream into the phone for nearly a minute before I spoke. Madison, I said softly, almost sweetly, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I hung up. That was the moment I knew the game had changed. They thought they had killed me on that mountain, but I was alive. And not only alive, I was watching them, hunting them, dismantling the empire of lies they had built one brick at a time. It wasn't enough yet. Not nearly. But it was a start. The seeds were planted. And revenge, I was learning, isn't a single strike. It's erosion. It's letting the river of truth eat away at the cliff face of lies until, one day, the whole structure collapses under its own weight. And Ethan and Madison's cliff was crumbling faster than they realized. It began quietly. A friend of mine at the Nashville Chamber of Commerce texted me one afternoon. "Hey, is it true about Ethan's bank? People are saying audits aren't looking good." I smiled at the screen. The whisper had taken root. At the same time, Madison's social life, her kingdom of curated selfies and brunch photos, began to show signs of strain. Posts that once gathered dozens of comments now sat with only a handful. The invitations to charity events slowed. Her circle was shrinking, though she pretended not to notice. Richard and I didn't speak of it openly, but we both felt the shift. It was working. Our silence, our careful nudges, our file of evidence, it was all tightening the noose. And then the first domino fell. One humid July morning, Richard set his coffee cup down on the kitchen table, his eyes scanning the local paper. "Bank of Franklin under investigation for irregularities," the headline read. My stomach clenched. I snatched the paper from him, scanning the article. It was brief, just a note that an internal review had uncovered discrepancies in client accounts, prompting a formal audit. No names mentioned, no charges yet, but I didn't need names. I knew Ethan would be sweating bullets, Madison would be raging, and I felt the first real spark of vindication since that hillside. They had tried to bury me, but now it was their reputations being lowered into the ground. The fallout came faster than I anticipated. By August, Ethan had been quietly placed on leave from the bank. Not fired. Not yet, but the kind of temporary leave that usually ends in a quiet dismissal. Word spread quickly in Franklin's small professional circles. A man once praised for his reliability was suddenly the subject of raised eyebrows and hushed speculation. Madison's frustration bled into the open. On social media, her posts grew sharper, defensive. She ranted about jealous people spreading lies and family who couldn't mind their own business. Friends who once showered her with heart emojis now left her comments unread. Richard and I said nothing. We watched. We waited. But silence has a way of driving guilty people mad. One evening, just as cicadas were buzzing in the Tennessee twilight, my phone rang. Ethan's number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, a text. "Mom, please pick up. We need to talk." Then another. "I don't know what you've heard, but it's not true. Please, just call me." I stared at the words, my heart a stone in my chest. This was the same son who had stood in my backyard and told me I wasn't his family. The same son who had looked at me with contempt, who had shoved me into a grave of rocks. And now he wanted me to pick up the phone? No. I deleted the messages without replying. The next day, another envelope went into his mailbox. This time, it was a printout of Madison's credit card statement, designer purchases stacked against Ethan's modest salary. Again, no note. Just evidence. The silence for me was deafening, and I knew it was driving them both mad. Then came the public unraveling. In late September, a mutual acquaintance invited me to a fundraiser in downtown Nashville. I hesitated. Public appearances hadn't exactly been my focus lately, but something in me knew I should go. Richard and I dressed carefully, not extravagantly, but with quiet dignity. When we walked into the ballroom at the Hermitage Hotel, conversations paused. Heads turned, because Ethan and Madison were there too. I saw it in their faces immediately. The shock, the flicker of fear. They hadn't expected me to show up. They hadn't expected me to still stand tall. Madison's smile faltered. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his tie suddenly too tight around his throat. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. I mingled with others, shook hands, laughed at jokes. And all the while, I felt their eyes on me, their panic simmering just below the surface. Later that evening, I caught Madison at the edge of the room, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp as she hissed into the receiver. People noticed. People whispered. The cracks in their mirror-perfect image were visible now, for everyone to see. October brought the breaking point. The audit at Ethan's bank went public. News outlets in Nashville reported on serious irregularities involving mid-level employees. Again, no names, but those in the know knew. Richard came home one evening with a faint smile tugging at his lips. "He's done," he said simply. "Even if they don't press charges, His career is over. And Madison? Her world collapsed with his. Invitations dried up completely. Friends ghosted her. The expensive car she flaunted on Instagram was quietly repossessed one crisp autumn morning. For years, she had strutted like a queen. Now, she was just another woman whose empire had turned to dust. But the moment that etched itself into my memory came one rainy evening in November. I was locking up the front door when headlights swept across the driveway. A car door slammed, and then a pounding at the door. I froze. Richard moved to the window, peering through the blinds. His voice was grim. "It's Ethan." The pounding grew louder. His voice, ragged, cracked, carried through the wood. "Mom, please, open the door. I need to talk to you." I stood in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob, every nerve in my body screaming. Images flashed through my mind. His small hand in mine as a child, his voice declaring I wasn't his family anymore, his shadow looming over me on that mountain. Richard placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Don't." The pounding continued. Rain poured harder, streaking the glass. His voice broke. "Please, Mom. I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. Just talk to me. Please." I didn't move. After what felt like an eternity, the pounding stopped. Silence. Then, the sound of footsteps retreating into the storm. I sank against the wall, trembling, my breath ragged. Richard knelt beside me, his face calm, resolute. "You don't owe him anything," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed it. That night, as thunder rolled across the Tennessee hills, I lay awake with a strange calm in my chest. Not triumph, not joy, but justice. The son who had betrayed me, who had tried to erase me, was finally facing consequences. The daughter-in-law who had mocked me, manipulated him, was finally stripped of her illusions. And this was only the beginning, because exposure was one thing, but confrontation, that was still to come. And I was ready. The storm that night had felt like a cleansing. The sound of rain against the roof, thunder rolling low across the Tennessee hills. It was as if the sky itself had decided to wash away the last of my illusions. I thought Ethan might not come back after that. He had already pounded on my door, begged for my attention, left soaked and broken in the rain. I thought maybe the humiliation of it would keep him away. But desperation is a stubborn thing. The next week, it wasn't just pounding on my door. It was phone calls, text messages, emails. At first, short, frantic ones. "Mom, please talk to me. You don't understand. I need your help. This is serious, Mom. They're going to ruin me." Then came longer messages, more frantic. Pages of apologies, twisted with excuses. I didn't mean what I said at the cookout. Madison was pressuring me. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. You're still my mom. Please, I can't lose you too." Each word was a knife, because part of me, the part that still remembered rocking him to sleep, wanted to believe him. But another part, stronger now, remembered the shove on that mountain. Remembered his voice saying, "That takes care of it." And so I did nothing. Silence, I had learned, was the sharpest blade of all. It was Madison who broke first. She showed up at my office one afternoon in early December, just as the winter wind howled outside. I was gathering my things, ready to leave for the day, when the door swung open, and there she was. Gone was the polished queen of social media. Her makeup was smudged, her coat too thin for the cold, her hair pulled back in a sloppy knot. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, but her eyes still burned with the same venom. "We need to talk," she snapped, as if barging into my workplace was her right. I stayed seated, my hands folded calmly on the desk. "About what?" "You know damn well about what," she hissed. "You've been spreading lies, poisoning people against us. Do you think we don't know?" I tilted my head. "I haven't said anything that isn't true." Her face twisted, a mask cracking. "You're destroying us. Ethan's lost his job. Everyone's whispering. We can't even go to the grocery store without people staring. Do you think this makes you the better person?" I stood slowly, each movement deliberate. The silence stretched until she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. "You tried to kill me," I said softly. "You and my son. On that mountain. You thought no one would ever know. You thought you could bury me in silence. Her lips parted, her face paling. That's insane. We never. I stepped closer, my voice low, steady, lethal. Save it. I was there. I heard you laugh when you thought I was gone. And now you're standing in front of me, begging for mercy. Her eyes darted, searching for a crack in my armor. You wouldn't ruin your own son, she whispered finally. I let the silence stretch again. Then, calmly, I said, watch me. She flinched as though I'd struck her. Then, with a sharp turn, she stormed out, her heels clacking down the hall like gunshots. I sank back into my chair, trembling, but not from fear. From power. For the first time in years, I was the one holding the strings. Christmas came cold and brittle. Richard and I decorated quietly, no photos on social media, no invitations extended. Our house glowed with warmth, but not for Ethan and Madison. 2 days before Christmas Eve, Ethan showed up. Not at my office, at my house. I heard the knock, softer this time, tentative. When I opened the door, there he stood, no umbrella, rain slicking his hair against his forehead. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt. He looked like a boy again, lost and desperate. Mom, he whispered. Please. For a moment, just a moment, I almost let the years fall away. Almost saw the child he used to be. But then memory came back. The mountain, the shove, the sound of his voice saying, that takes care of it. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind me. What do you want, Ethan? He swallowed hard. His hands shook as he shoved them into his pockets. They're saying charges might come. The bank, the money, it's all falling apart. And Madison, his voice cracked. She's talking about leaving me. I said nothing. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to do. I've screwed everything up. I just need my mom. The words cut, deeper than I wanted them to. Because once I had been everything to him. Once he had run into my arms with scraped knees and childish fears, and I had always made it better. But I wasn't his safe place anymore. I was his reckoning. You need help, I said finally, my voice flat. But not from me. His face crumpled. Please. I stepped back, my hand on the doorknob. You made your choice, Ethan. You chose her. You chose greed. You chose betrayal. And now you want me to save you from the consequences. His tears spilled over. He shook his head, his voice breaking. I didn't mean it. That day on the mountain I panicked. Madison, she... Stop, I snapped, sharper than I intended. He froze. You tried to kill me, I said, my voice shaking with the force of it. There is no coming back from that. His mouth opened, but no words came. And then, quietly, I closed the door. The sound of his sobs on the other side tore at me, but I did not open it again. That night, I sat by the fire with Richard, staring into the flames. My heart was heavy, but it no longer bled. You did what you had to do, Richard said softly. I nodded. He wanted me gone. Now he's the one fading. For years, I had begged for reconciliation. For years, I had swallowed insults, overlooked cruelty, hoped for healing. But now I understood the truth. Closure doesn't always come from hugs or apologies. Sometimes, closure comes from shutting the door and leaving it shut. And so I did. In January, the charges came. Embezzlement. Fraud. Ethan's name was finally in the papers, his face on the evening news. Madison's name surfaced too, complicit, benefiting from his theft. The empire they had built on lies was rubble now, scattered for the world to see. I clipped the article and tucked it into the file we had built. Not out of gloating, though part of me relished it, but as a reminder that the truth always wins, even if it takes time. Ethan and Madison had tried to silence me forever. Instead, it was their own voices, their own names being dragged through the mud of public exposure. And as I sat there, the firelight flickering against the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. January bled into February, and with it came the trial. Ethan's face appeared on local news broadcasts, grainy footage of him walking into the courthouse, shoulders hunched, Madison trailing behind like a shadow. Neighbors whispered. Friends turned away. My son, once admired for his ambition, was now a cautionary tale. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on multiple counts of embezzlement. Madison, though not charged formally, was named repeatedly in testimonies about lavish spending and suspicious transfers. She wasn't in handcuffs, but her reputation was just as shackled. They didn't go to prison, not yet. The sentencing loomed, and with it, the possibility of years behind bars. And through it all, I stayed silent, watching, waiting, until one gray morning in early March, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, my name scrawled across it in a hand I knew better than my own. Ethan's handwriting. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening it, my coffee growing cold beside me. My hand shook as I slid the letter out, unfolded the lined paper. Mom, I know I don't deserve for you to read this. I know I've done things that can't be undone. But I can't stop thinking about you. About how I pushed you away. About how I betrayed everything you gave me. I don't know if it was Madison or greed, or just my own weakness, but it was me. I did it, and I would give anything to take it back. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to reply. I just needed you to know that I remember the good too. I remember the nights you stayed up with me when I was sick, the way you clapped at every Little League game, the Christmas mornings when you made the house smell like cinnamon and safety. I remember all of it. And I'm sorry I traded that for what I thought was more. If you can ever find it in your heart to see me as your son again, I'll be waiting. Even if it takes forever. Love, Ethan. Tears blurred the ink before I even finished reading. My chest ached with the weight of it. For so long, I had wanted to hear those words, I'm sorry. And yet, now that I had them, they felt like ashes in my hands. Too late. Too broken. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. I couldn't throw it away, but I couldn't answer it either. Not yet. The next gesture came weeks later. A small box on my porch, no return address. Inside was a photo, Ethan at age 10, grinning wide with missing teeth, holding a baseball bat nearly as tall as he was. Beneath it, a note in the same shaky handwriting. Thought you might want this back. I sat on the porch steps for a long time, the photo trembling in my hands. That boy, the one in the photo, I had loved him with everything in me. That boy had trusted me, had needed me. But the man he became? The man who shoved me into the earth, who chose Madison's whispers over my love. That man had nearly killed me. How could I reconcile the two? Richard noticed the change in me. He always did. One evening, as we sat by the fire, he touched my hand gently. You've been quieter lately. I stared into the flames. He's trying. Letters. Pictures. He wants me to see the boy he used to be. Richard's expression softened, but his voice stayed steady. And do you? My throat tightened. I don't know. Part of me wants to hold on to him. Part of me wants to burn it all and never look back. He squeezed my hand. You don't have to decide tonight. Or tomorrow. You decide when you're ready, or not at all. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes. He was right. Healing wasn't a deadline. In April, I saw Ethan again. Not at my door. Not at a fundraiser. At the cemetery. It was Richard's idea to visit my first husband's grave that day, to bring flowers as the dogwoods bloomed. But as we approached the familiar headstone, I froze. Someone was already there. Ethan. He stood with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders slumped, staring at the stone. His lips moved as if he were speaking, though I couldn't hear his words. When he noticed us, he startled like a child caught stealing cookies. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the spring breeze rustling the trees around us. Mom, he whispered. His voice cracked. I just wanted to talk to him. To Dad. Something in me broke at the sight of him there, my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had betrayed me, standing at his father's grave like a penitent child. I didn't speak. Richard placed a steadying hand on my back, grounding me. Ethan swallowed hard. I don't expect you to stay. I wanted you to know I'm trying. And then he walked away, leaving us with the flowers and the silence. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not just for the betrayal, not just for the hurt, but for the possibility of something that could never be the same. Could I forgive him? Could I ever let him close again, knowing what he had done? knowing how close I had come to dying by his hand. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't always about letting someone back in. Sometimes it's about setting them down gently and walking away. I didn't know yet which path I would choose, but I knew one thing: the power was mine now. Not Ethan's, not Madison's, mine. And for the first time, that was enough. Spring ripened into summer, and with it came the sentencing. I didn't attend the hearing in Nashville. I told myself it was because I wanted distance, because the wounds were still raw. But in truth, it was because I couldn't bear to see him in chains. My son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy who once brought me dandelions from the yard. Instead, I followed the news quietly from home. Ethan was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole. Madison escaped charges again. Slick lawyers and lack of direct evidence had shielded her, but she didn't escape public shame. Her friends had vanished. Her family kept her at arm's length. She was alone, even when she stood next to Ethan. And me, I felt not joy, not triumph, something quieter, something heavier. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence. One evening in late June, I sat in the attic, sorting through boxes. Dust clung to my fingers, the air thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten years. I found the photo albums I had tucked away, the ones filled with Ethan's childhood. First steps, first day of school, baseball trophies, Halloween costumes, his gap-toothed smile beaming at me through time. For years, those albums had been my pride. Then, after the mountain, they became poison. Now, they were something else entirely, a record of a life that no longer existed. I flipped through them slowly, my tears falling silently onto the plastic sleeves. The boy in those photos wasn't the man who had betrayed me, and the man who had betrayed me could never be that boy again. When I reached the last page, I closed the album gently. Then, after a long moment, I carried it downstairs. Richard looked up from his chair as I set it on the coffee table. His eyes softened, understanding without words. "You're ready," he said quietly. I nodded. Not ready to forgive, not ready to forget, but ready to accept. July brought Madison to my door. I hadn't seen her since the courthouse. She looked older now, thinner, her confidence stripped bare. She stood on my porch with a trembling smile, clutching a small envelope. "I thought you should have this," she said softly. "It's from Ethan." I hesitated, then took it. She lingered as if she wanted to say more, but when I stayed silent, she turned and walked away. Inside the envelope was another letter, shorter this time. "Mom, I don't ask for forgiveness anymore. I just want you to live free of me. Please, don't let my mistakes weigh you down. You gave me more than I deserved, and I'm sorry I threw it away. Whatever happens, know that I loved you once, and I wish I had loved you better." I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside the photo album on the coffee table, and closed the cover. It would stay there, not to haunt me, but to remind me of what I had survived. The summer heat swelled, and with it, a strange peace settled over me. I no longer jumped when the phone rang. I no longer flinched at shadows in the driveway. The fear, the rage, the desperate ache, they had quieted. One evening, Richard and I drove to Radnor Lake. We walked the trails slowly, his hand warm in mine, the cicadas singing in the trees. When we reached the overlook, I stopped. The view stretched out before us, green and endless, the lake shimmering under the fading sun. And for a moment, it reminded me of the mountain in Colorado, the place where Ethan had tried to erase me. But here, now, I wasn't broken. I wasn't bleeding. I was alive, stronger. Richard squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I smiled faintly. Better than okay. Because standing there, I realized something profound. Ethan's choices had almost ended me, but they hadn't. He had tried to push me into silence, but I had found my voice. He had tried to take my future, but I had built a new one. With Richard, with my own strength. The mountain had been his choice. This lake, this life was mine. That night, back home, I lit a single candle on the kitchen table. Beside it, I placed the photo album and Ethan's last letter. I didn't pray for him. I didn't curse him either. I simply sat in the quiet glow of the candlelight, breathing deeply, letting the silence settle over me like a blanket. Then, when the candle burned low, I whispered into the dark, I release you. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just release. The weight slid off my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Families are supposed to mean safety, love, loyalty. I used to believe that without question. But family is also choice. The people we let into our hearts, the ones we allow to shape our lives. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Love doesn't erase betrayal. I chose Richard. I chose peace. I chose myself. And that choice was enough. The photo album stayed on the shelf. The candle melted to nothing. Life went on. Seasons changed. And I carried no more ghosts. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't exposing Ethan, or ruining Madison, or even surviving the fall. The greatest revenge was living well. And I was finally, blessedly, doing just that. Freedom, I had learned, doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, like sunlight filtering through blinds. A morning without nightmares. A dinner without the echo of old arguments. A walk in the park without scanning every shadow, waiting for betrayal to emerge again. By the time autumn returned to Tennessee, I had stitched together enough of those moments to call it healing. Richard and I had carved out a life untouched by Ethan and Madison's poison. Our days were filled with quiet routines. Morning coffee on the porch, long drives through the Smokies, evenings spent in the soft hum of each other's company. Peace had become our new currency, and for the first time, I had plenty of it. And yet, the echoes remained. The first came in the form of a letter. It was September when I received official correspondence from the prison in Kentucky, where Ethan was serving his sentence. My hands trembled as I opened it, expecting another plea for forgiveness. Instead, it was brief, almost clinical. Mom, they've given me a chance at early release programs if I keep my record clean. I don't know if I'll make it, but I'm trying. I thought you'd want to know. I hope you're well. No apologies this time. No long confessions. Just a quiet acknowledgement of his reality. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the letter flat against the wood. Richard found me there, his brow furrowed with concern. Are you all right? He asked. I nodded slowly. He's surviving. And strangely, that was enough. I didn't feel the ache to respond, nor the rage to tear it apart. Just a calm acceptance that my son was where he needed to be, facing the consequences of his choices. The second echo came from Madison. Her downfall had been less dramatic than Ethan's, but perhaps crueler. With Ethan behind bars, she had no shield, no status, no carefully curated life to hide behind. Word reached me through neighbors and acquaintances. She'd been working odd jobs, selling possessions, even moving back in with distant relatives. One afternoon, I saw her at the Franklin Farmers Market. She was behind a booth, selling homemade candles, her once manicured hands stained with wax. She caught sight of me across the rows of stalls. For a long moment, our eyes locked. Her face flushed, and she quickly looked away, fumbling with the jars on her table. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. That silent glance told me everything I needed to know. She had fallen, and she knew I had watched. There was no triumph in it, only closure. But the loudest echo came not from letters or markets, but from within me. Every so often, when I least expected it, I would dream of the mountain. The crunch of gravel, the whisper of wind, the sudden shove. I would wake with my heart hammering, my body bracing for impact that never came. One morning, after such a dream, I found myself driving without thinking, past the town limits, past the familiar roads, until the mountains rose around me again. Not Colorado this time. Tennessee hills, softer, greener, but still steep enough to remind me. I parked at a trailhead near the Cumberland Plateau and began to walk. Each step felt heavier than the last, carrying me back into memory. Halfway up the trail, I stopped at an overlook. The world stretched out before me, vast and unbroken. And for the first time, I let myself speak aloud. You didn't win. My voice trembled, but the words rang true. Ethan hadn't won. Madison hadn't won. The fall hadn't claimed me. I stood there until the sun dipped low, until the shadows stretched long, and then I walked back down with my head held high. Life moved on. Richard and I celebrated anniversaries. We planted a small garden in the backyard. I took up painting again, filling canvases with color instead of grief. But sometimes when the evenings were quiet, I would think about the twists of fate that had brought me here. About how family could betray you in the deepest ways, and yet how love, real love, chosen love, could still anchor you. One night, Richard found me gazing at the photo album on the shelf. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into his arms. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. The echoes would always be there. The mountain, the betrayal, the loss of a son I once thought I knew. But echoes fade. They grow softer with time, less sharp, less consuming. What remained was me, alive, whole, stronger, and that was enough. A year had passed since the sentencing when I realized I no longer lived in fear of the past. The days had settled into something steady, almost gentle. Morning coffee with Richard, walks along the Natchez Trace Parkway, quiet evenings filled with books, laughter, or the rustle of wind through the Tennessee trees. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, not the one where Ethan grew into a man I could trust, not the one where family meant safety without question. But it was a life I had chosen, and that made it more precious than anything I'd lost. Still, I wanted to mark it somehow, to put a final stone on the grave of what had been, and step fully into what was. And so, one crisp autumn evening, I decided on a ritual. I went to the attic one last time. The photo albums waited there, heavy with memories. I carried them down, dust clinging to my fingers, and laid them on the kitchen table. Beside them, I placed the letters Ethan had written me from prison, apologies, explanations, half-formed confessions. And then I lit a single candle. Its flame flickered softly, casting shadows across the walls. Richard sat across from me, silent, watching. He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't need to. For hours, I sat there, turning pages, rereading words, laughing at Ethan's childhood grins, weeping at his broken pleas, pausing at the photos where I could still see the boy I had once loved without reservation. The candle burned lower and lower. When the wax finally pooled at the base, I whispered, "Thank you for what was. Goodbye to what will never be." Then, gently, I closed the album, tied the stack of letters together with a ribbon, and placed them both back in the box. I didn't burn them. I didn't throw them away. I simply put them away where they belonged. The past was no longer my present. Weeks later, I received one final letter from Ethan. "Mom, I won't write again after this. I know my words can't undo anything, and I don't want to keep reopening wounds. I just want you to know that I've been sober for months now. I've been working in the prison library, helping others learn to read. It's small, but it makes me feel like maybe I can still be something other than what I've been. If I ever walk free again, I won't come to you unless you ask. I won't demand your forgiveness. I'll just live quietly, carrying what I've done. I wanted you to hear that from me. So you know I'm not running from it anymore. Whatever happens, I hope you're happy. You deserve that much." I read it once, twice, 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, tucked it into the box with the others, and closed the lid. That was the last letter I ever received from my son. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. The past doesn't vanish. It lingers in echoes, in scars, in the quiet moments when memory sneaks in. But it no longer defined me. I found joy in painting again, in strokes of color that had nothing to do with grief. I found comfort in Richard's laughter, in the warmth of his hand in mine. I found peace in the ordinary, the smell of autumn leaves, the sound of rain on the roof, the stillness of nights unbroken by fear. Family, I realize, isn't just blood. It's the people who choose you, who anchor you, who never raise their hands to push you over a cliff. Richard was my family now, my anchor, my choice, and I was enough for myself, too. One evening, a year to the day after Ethan's sentencing, Richard and I returned to Radnor Lake. The air was crisp, the water still, the trees ablaze with autumn fire. We walked the trail slowly, our breath misting in the cool air. When we reached the overlook, I stopped. From my bag, I pulled a small candle, the same kind I had lit at the kitchen table. I set it gently on the ground, shielding the flame from the breeze as I struck a match. The flame flickered to life, small but steady. We stood in silence, watching it glow against the darkening sky. "This is it," I whispered. "The last candle." Richard slipped his arm around my shoulders. "The last one." We stayed until the wax melted, until the flame sputtered and went out. And as the smoke curled into the twilight, I felt a weight lift from me completely. The past was gone. The future was mine. And I walked back down the trail lighter than I had ever been. Families are supposed to mean safety, love, and loyalty. Once, I thought that was guaranteed. Now I knew better. Family is what you build. Family is who stands beside you when the world collapses. Family is who holds your hand when the mountain crumbles beneath you. And as long as I had that chosen love, chosen peace, I had everything I needed. The mountain had not claimed me. I had claimed myself. And that was the ending I chose.